The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello, I'm Carl Seidel, host of The People's View. The show is sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee, and if you like to attend our meetings, they're the second Thursday of every month at 6:30 at the Crown Plaza. And if you want to find out more about our organization, you can go to nashuagop.org to see our website and learn about the events that we have. Hello, and as a welcome to our new People's View, the People's View on Legislation. I want to introduce my co-host, Bill Ohm, who was a representative for Ward 8.
Ward 9.
Ward 9. And David Schoneman, who was a alderman from Ward 3.
That's correct.
And what we want to do on the People's View is to introduce all of the people in Nashua to the Republican point of view. These people, since we are not representative now as your representatives up in Concord, we have decided to give you our information on legislation over the TV public access station. So we'll start right off, Bill. Bill, we have a couple of subjects you want to talk about.
Yeah, I was thinking, Carl, about what's useful to our viewers, and I thought one thing would be what's in the news and how would it affect them. So I was looking at the paper with Dave, and we came across a few topics in yesterday's Union Leader. One of the lead stories on the first page was electrical transmission improvements. So there's an $84 million project to improve the electrical grid in New Hampshire. And it's a 13-mile improvement, new power lines. And, well, what does that mean for the folks? Well, it means a couple of things. One is that we're going to have better reliability in the region because, as trees come down and knock out power lines, and also as more energy is drawn into the region, there's only so much you can put onto the existing corridors before you've got to switch it over. So this is another backup corridor for energy into southern New Hampshire. Now, this is in the ISO grid, New England grid, which covers all the states of New England. So everybody's going to pay for this. And of that $84 million, New Hampshire pays about 10%. The other folks contribute toward our reliability. So I think this is a pretty interesting deal for New Hampshire.
And how much does that come to, what does it got, that gets picked up in the bills that we see?
Yeah, that's in your electric bills. There's a couple of different charges now after deregulation. So we have an energy charge. What's the cost of Seabrook? What's the cost of any of the dams? What's the cost of the energy? And then after the energy cost is established, then there's the transmission and distribution costs. So this is the transmission and distribution part of your bill, which will be going up a little bit, but most of that is covered by the folks in the other states.
Go ahead.
Okay, one of the questions I think folks have at home a lot is about the overall cost of our energy. Our energy costs are very, very high. So will this project do anything to affect the overall cost, or is this, how is that effect going to be felt?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, this is just the transmission and distribution. It has nothing to do with the generation of the power, which is the biggest part of all these costs. In fact, on the biggest part of those costs, we have these stranded costs. We had started to build Seabrook, then we had a bunch of delays, then it was partially completed. Not all the reactors were built, so we're kind of lipping on this high-cost structure that now has to be amortized over less of a power-generating capability, one generator instead of 2 or 3 plants at Seabrook. Second part is the Merrimack Station plant. And this was a really unfortunate mess about 10 years ago. Merrimack Station is a coal-fired plant. Big decision, do we keep it? Do we divest it? Do we shut it down? And the legislature back in 28 or so decided that, well, we're going to spend $400 million of taxpayer money to build this high-tech scrubber. So that'll be the cleanest coal plant probably in the world. And after spending $400 million to do this. Then the EPA wanted to shut it down.
EPA wanted to shut it down.
They did.
Why did they want to shut it down?
Well, the administration, the Obama administration, didn't like fossil fuel plants.
I see.
So they kept regulating emissions tighter and tighter. Well, this was a clean plant, so they went after the the Merrimack Valley water discharge. I testified in that hearing. The objection they had was that we're going to change the temperature of the river because we're taking in Merrimack water into the plant to cool the boilers and putting back out. Now, the water going out is cleaner than the water coming in.
Because they filter it, yeah.
Yeah, because it's filtered and it's warm. So the objection was putting warm, clean water into the Merrimack River.
We're going to take care of the
Because it's going to
fishes?
change the ecology of the river because the puckerfish or whatever like colder water and they're going to have to move. And the testimony that we had on this bill was from sportsmen. You know, the pond that's behind the plant didn't freeze over in the wintertime because it's now getting warm water. So they could go out there and they would catch, bass. And they wouldn't eat them, but they would catch and release, sports fishermen. So they were happy about that. The kayakers wanted to go out, keep in shape. They like paddling on the pond in the wintertime. But the environmentalists who were protecting the fish eggs were all unhappy.
Well, it's funny how EPA can just screw up a simple rule or a simple thing that they spend so much more. We spend so much more money on. I had a story like that way back in the 70s when the company I work for was held up about contaminating the water in Massachusetts, and they actually had to prove that they were cleaning it up because they were removing things like mercury and other things so that what they gave out was purer than what came into the town.
And that was the case here. Would have been the case.
Yeah, the water's coming out purer than it came into the plant.
So meanwhile, this $400 million project had to be paid for without any benefit.
It's still being paid for.
It's still being paid for. Yeah, and this all adds costs to our electric bills, and I think that we're seeing that when politics get involved and some good intentions with unintended consequences, really, we end up having the highest electric rates in the country. And I don't really think that little old New Hampshire is having an effect on global warming or climate change. Certainly not the kind of effect that the entire country has or countries like China and India have. So when we do things like that really cripple our economy for no essential benefit to the worldwide problem, we have to wonder why. I mean, what is the point of doing making these political moves that really don't do anything to help the folks at home?
I think some of that is being brought out by the current administration when they look at some of these things and look at the unintended consequences because it wasn't fully thought out in the first place.
Right.
I think that's one of the things that I hope we can bring up on a lot of different pieces of literature during the coming year, is that we make people aware of some of the other aspects that aren't published or aren't even discussed until it's too late.
Right.
Yeah. And I think this relates to government expansion. Back in the 60s and 70s, the EPA was really needed, and they did a great job. We had the Merrimack River running orange. We had all kinds of pollutants going into the river. And the original Clean Water Act and the enforcement of the act, the good people in New Hampshire cleaning this up, did a great job. But having solved the problem, you think that we'd take these really smart people, hardworking people, and put on something else. What's the next big problem? But it never seems to work that way. They just kind of hit diminishing returns, and now there's less and less to chase here. And now we're worried about fish eggs instead of important topics. I mean, can't these smart people be redeployed into something else?
You would think that would be possible, but I think that we developed this entire system that then depends upon maintaining the problem, or keeping the problem alive, in order to maintain jobs and maintain funding and maintain control and power and all these kinds of things. So we develop a system that claims to be maybe solving a problem, but in effect is just perpetuating the one that maybe they've already solved.
Yeah, excellent point, Dave.
Yeah. So.
Well, there are a number of other things that we have to look at on all these pieces of legislation. And I hope that we can provide our listeners a little better view of that. But basically, I think the way we approach it, we look for a smaller government that's more effective, more efficient, and gives the people more choices.
Right.
I think that's really one way of looking at it, not building the government and getting them into all sorts of things that they're not expert at, and taking away a lot of choices.
Well, Bill's article, the one that you just raised, I think is an excellent case in point, because here was a problem that if we deal with the facts, we can solve it and then move on to something
That's
else.
right.
But instead, government sees that as a chance to grow. And in order to keep it going, we have to spin it, and we have to exaggerate it and do all these other things. And that really shouldn't be. So if we can take the focus, I think government, and the three of us here, our government can take the focus of sticking to the facts, really working on solving a problem that helps the folks at home, not just furthers our political careers. I think that we're all going to be better off, because that's what good government should be. We should really be helping the folks at home live a better life here.
And understanding what is being talked about,
Right.
Get them to understand the facts, the problem,
Right.
and what you really want to do. You want to, make it better for everybody. And that means financially, that means health-wise, and means everything.
Right.
There's also a realization you can't do everything for everybody right away.
Right.
It's priorities. What are today's important priorities, and how do we identify those priorities, do a force ranking, because we can't do them all, but get the important ones done and use our best resources for those important projects.
Yeah, I think the energy one has got to be high up
it's gotta
there,
be up there.
because our entire economy depends on that. Any company that's going to come into New Hampshire that wants to manufacture a product is going to need energy to do that.
Right.
And when we start competing or trying to compete with states that have much lower costs, whether it's the Dakotas or Texas or whatever, it's hard. And what's the benefit of doing the politically correct thing when we're losing or harming our economy in the process?
And we don't want to lose any of the companies that we have already.
We don't want to lose
there are
people.
several
We don't want to lose
that
companies.
are worried about the high
And
cost.
people who are not expanding in New Hampshire,
Right.
Right.
Stromruger,
Right.
we'd like to keep them here, but they look, you're a little expensive now in energy. I got to look at other places for expansion.
I don't
let's-
blame them for that.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about something else, which just to show the variety of the things we want to talk about. And
Sure.
Dave, you had a little
Yes, I
thing
came
you wanted
across
to bring up.
something. This is from the Union Leader from yesterday, and actually today is December 12th, so this is Tuesday, December 11th. If anyone wants to look it up, on their editorial page, there's a brief editorial here titled "California Scheming: Early Voting May Play into the Primary." Very interesting story, and I think it's especially important for us right now because we just finished re-electing Gardner as Secretary of State, and I think he's
By
done
a
it
whisker.
by a whisker. It was very, very close, but it just goes to show you that somehow cooler heads prevail. If we
There are
just
enough
keep our
people
fingers
that
crossed.
understood how valuable he is.
He's very, very valuable. I think he's done an excellent job. Longest-serving Secretary of State in the country. He's been on the job for how many years? 40. That's what I thought. I didn't want to state the facts wrong though here, especially when we're talking about facts. So we have the first in the nation primary, and that's part of what puts New Hampshire on the map. It's very important. We're a small state, 1.3 million people, but all these candidates can come to New Hampshire and for relatively small money get national exposure. Can't do that in California, because if you want to really get national exposure in California, you got to reach the whole state, and that's a very large state. But here, 1.3 million people, everybody can be in the running. And so it's a great opportunity to showcase candidates early in the election cycle. We get a chance to see everybody. And of course, the field gets weeded out as time goes on. But our first in the nation primary status is very, very important to us. It's important to us politically. It's important to us on a tourist basis. That's a big part of our economy.
It's
Not the
important
biggest.
really to the whole country.
To the whole country.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Because this is the place they can afford to come to.
Exactly.
Where, if you go to California, you got too many places to go.
I talk to my friends in other states. I say, yeah, I went to a meeting with Trump, or I went to a meeting with whoever,
And you usually get to shake their hands.
Get to shake their hands. They don't know who I am, but that's okay. It's good exposure.
And the other part is New Hampshire is fairly evenly developed. It was somewhat of a purple state, I guess they call it.
Yes,
And
that's
I
right.
think that gives them a fair comparison across the people.
Well, it's a benefit to us, and I think other states look at us, and they look at us with some element of envy in their eyes. So our primary is typically in February in the presidential year, so it's coming up in 2020. Periodically, or probably every cycle, we see some state wants to try to move theirs up to get into that #1 position. And so California now is talking about making their primary March 3rd, and they want to allow early voting up to a month in advance. So what that means is that they're trying to get folks in California to be able to vote maybe a little bit earlier than the folks in New Hampshire will, because ours is typically in February. And the reason it's so important that Secretary Gardner was reelected is because he's the one who really takes care of maintaining that status for the state of New Hampshire. He's going to look at all the other primary dates, and he's going to set ours to be at least a week in advance of all those.
It'll be a fair contest. There won't be any ballot irregularities.
Right. We've seen plenty of that. And while there have been some folks in New Hampshire arrested for fraudulent voting and being tried, I think that's great that we're focusing on and cracking down on that. By and large, we don't have those kinds of problems like we've heard about from other states. So I think that the folks throughout the country can be assured of honest polling, a clean election, and a large number of candidates if we come here first.
Yeah, it's a test of ideas, not a test of fundraising.
And that's very, very important. Certainly elections take a lot of money. All of us know that. It takes way more than some people might realize. With the Senate race, I raised $20,000. That's a lot of dough.
Yeah.
How can it possibly take that much money? Well, it just does. And certainly for anything presidential, the numbers are astronomical. But someone can come in with a relatively small budget. And if he has a good ground game, he or she has a good ground game, and gets volunteers out there knocking on doors, distributing the literature, whatnot, they can get some exposure. And that can make all the difference. So I think it's very important that we keep this. I'm very glad Secretary Gardner has been reelected, and that he'll do his best. I'm not sure what the early voting, how that will really affect us, because the early voting in California, those results won't be released, theoretically, not officially. Until
keep it going a little bit.
Right, there'll be a lot of rumors, a lot of exit polling, of course. And we don't want California exit polling to begin to influence, because again, that's a large ticket race, and big money involved.
So that's something that we really should help Gardner, defend.
Yes, we should. And we always talk about bipartisanship. Secretary Gardner's a Democrat.
Right.
And I'm very happy with the guy. I very strongly supported him. I didn't have a chance to vote for him in this because our Secretary of State is chosen by the legislature itself. But I think it's great. He's done a good job, and I strongly
And I don't think people appreciate his historic perspective and how important that is in selling what we want to do here in New Hampshire. And he actually has books on the New Hampshire Constitution that he gives to the school kids that come up there. And he talks to them and tells them, the history. And this coming year is a bicentennial year. So that's going to be a big historic thing too, on top of any kind of, things that are political.
Well, so we'll see what happens with that one, but I think that we're always challenged, and we have to do our best to maintain our status. It's important to the state. It's important to the country.
Yeah.
So, again, it's something we find in the paper.
Okay.
Pick up the paper and read it.
Bill, you had something else you wanted to bring up?
I was looking at a couple of things in the paper. It was a good paper yesterday. Lots of interesting topics for the folks.
That's right.
One I have here is the Flatley Company gets an extension for Nashua Townhouse project. Now, there's this big section of Nashua between exit 1 and exit 4 behind the old Sheridan Terra, which is largely owned by Flatley right now for development. And they put some very nice rental property in. They've got several hundred two-bedroom, two-bath rental units. And now they're looking at putting in a condo portion of that. This particular one was 7 buildings, 28 units with 2-car garages. It'd be a very nice piece of property. And they're going to want a little more time to develop this. And it's routinely given that, the the city of town give an extra year if you're going to run a little behind because things take longer than expected. So they're going to apply for the standard 1-year extension. But it brings up a kind of a policy question on development in Nashua. When you're bringing in more rental income, more houses, you're bringing in a lot more burdens on police, fire, and schools because these are families. What you'd like to have is more of a balanced development, I think, where you're bringing some businesses, some jobs, some manufacturing or some office work that would bring in businesses that don't necessarily burden the police, fire, and school system, but bring in tax money into New Hampshire. So part of this long-term plan is to do an industrial park. And I think the worry I have is that if Flatley becomes too interested in apartments, and condos, they may start to de-emphasize this industrial park that they were hoping to bring in as part of the master plan. And I think it's very important for our aldermen and the mayor to make sure that we understand the need for balanced development, not just, housing in the border of New Hampshire for people who work in Mass, but for jobs in New Hampshire, for businesses in New Hampshire that are going to pay taxes and support the economy of New Hampshire besides just the housing. And that's in Ward 8 of Nashua.
Well, they're going to have hearings on that, or what?
Well, what's coming up is, I think, kind of a perfunctory zoning approval. Say, look, we'd like 1 year to do this part of our master plan. And I'm sure that's going to be granted. But the worry is that they may start to, the master plan we had isn't quite working right now. And this happened in Manchester. If you read the paper earlier in the week, there was a industrial development park in Manchester that was going to be developed for industrial use. And it was slow getting started. One of the companies in there was making sensitive equipment, and they needed to have quiet ground, not a lot of rumbling. Only this industrial park turned into a landfill with trucks running up and down to, shake the ground and affect this company's business. And they were saying, look, we wanted a stable environment that's not going to have, garbage trucks running up and down the street and shaking our instruments that are being tested and manufactured. And what happened to this industrial park? So now it's controversial in Manchester. Well, we don't know if we're going to do this industrial park or not. Maybe we should do more housing. So you can see this eroding, and that's the example that I'm worried about with the Flatley company. So I think it's up to the alderman and the mayor to make sure we hold to what our original intentions were in that zoning and don't let the industrial part of that just disappear.
Yeah, but it's have reasonable regulations, but not things that are going to be a real problem and a surprise, more or less, to the developer. You don't want you want them to be able to think this through before they change things.
Yeah, but they're going to go where the low-hanging fruit is. If there's a big demand for housing, and there's less demand for industrial property, they're going to say, well, maybe we'll just do the housing first and do the industrial property later. And in the case of Manchester, maybe never.
Yeah, we can't afford to let the opportunity for industrial development slip. It's very, very important.
Well, that's one of the things too that I'm on the rail committee for the city, and they're looking at ways to justify that. But one of the things that I've brought up is that they're not even considering the transportation to these industrial parks. There are a lot of people that need transportation. Either they're a one-car family, or and it's both of them are working, or they are no cars. They're very low-income people, and maybe they're even on some kind of aid, some kind of financial aid. We ought to look at ways of getting these people to a job. And we have an industrial park where you're talking about the way they're doing it is good, and I think that we ought to encourage that. But let's make sure they have transportation. I know the Flatley came to the city and tried to see if they could get some kind of buses going there, but it didn't work out. But I'm trying to get them to think wider. Maybe have a deal with Uber or Lyft or whatever to use their cars during the rush hour times, just to supplement their bus station or whatever. And if we can look at that, not only for Nashua, it might be for the whole county. I mean, you got the big industrial park up in near the airport, up there in Manchester, Londonderry actually, and you have Milford, and we have a number of different industrial parks. BAE got them to handle a bus because they didn't have parking space for all their people. So now they have a parking space where they're hoping to put a train station, and they have a bus just getting the people from there over to the building where they're going to work. So we got to think a little bit broader and how we can use some of these services that are already out there without we're using a new way of using them. You know, not looking at it just the old way with bus stops at certain stops. Have them more focused on where people are going from here to there.
Right.
And maybe we can work some kind of thing out that's a combination.
You see that happening right now with Uber. You know, instead of just rides, they'll deliver food for you. And last time I took an Uber, you could carpool. You can get 2 people in the car for a little less money.
Right.
And then, so thinking about the transportation of the industrial park, on Spitbrook Road where I live, we've got buses, but we don't have that spur going into the development. You could have, say, some Uber people say, look, we're going to have commuters coming in, so if you guys want to hang around, you can load up a car back and forth, do a shuttle for 1 mile back and forth between the bus stop, and you could do a special deal or have a voucher that the company might give a person for a free ride to come and work for us.
I think a combination of the company, the city, and Uber or Lyft or whatever, that would work out so it's a way of reasonably providing the transportation. I think when I was down in Florida, I understand Uber's doing something for Tampa, Florida, during rush hour, which is cutting down the congestion because we don't have 10 cars, you have one van with 10 people in it.
Let me ask you a question, Carl, because you're on transportation. What's the state's thinking right now on this topic at the legislative level? Is there any plans to expand like the bus service to Logan or the rail issue? What's likely to come up?
There's a plan to increase it only as it's needed. It's handling it fairly well now. I mean, they start 5:30 in the morning and they go till 10:30 at night. So that covers almost all of them. You just don't want to come in after 10:30. That's all.
It cost me a $100 Uber ride to get out of Logan when my flight was delayed.
But no, I think there is also the government's looking at a 20-year plan, if you believe it or not, for rural transportation. And Hillsborough County is one that they're looking at. The Southern Planning Commission that's looking into it. They're starting to collect data, but it's a 20-year kind of thing. But I see no reason why we can't work with them, and even if as they're collecting data, see if we can use data to let them focus on delivering people to where they have to work.
Right.
I think that's something that we have to get into, and we're having a committee meeting coming up, and that's what I'm going to suggest, that we do a little bit more about working with our surrounding communities. And this is a New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire transportation, east and west, is not very good.
Right.
And if they had something like 101 going, from Manchester over to the coast, that's what you want, limited access.
A friend of mine was working in Keene, living here in New Hampshire.
Really?
And he was having to drive back and forth every day. And it's a hike.
And it's a 2-lane road.
And it's a 2-lane road,
And there's lots of speed traps.
Yeah, there are, but it's dangerous. It was a hard drive. Now he's working in Nashua because it just became too much. It was a great job out there, but it became too much because it was just too difficult. What's interesting, I think, to note too, we talked about the economy. We mentioned tourism a little while ago. I think a lot of people think tourism is the biggest part of our economy. It's not. Manufacturing, especially high-tech manufacturing in the southern tier of New Hampshire, is the most important part of our economy. It's the biggest sector. And I think we should consider these companies as our customers, really.
Right.
And if providing better transportation for their folks is something that's going to help them, I think we should do everything we can to encourage them and help them. So these are good ideas.
But it's a matter of looking at the whole picture, not just driving a train from Manchester down to Lowell or something like that, or around to Worcester. Worcester's looking at it a little bit differently too. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's an interest in getting a train to go sort of the outer strip around Boston. So that they can get communications all the way down to Providence. But,
well, it's going to be important to look at the entire picture, just like you're saying, and not make these decisions based purely on politics. Because what I've been observing in the last year or so is that politics doesn't really make for a good business decision. It just doesn't work. It's a process that we have, and it's one that we work with, but we're embarking on some things that were decided on a political basis, like energy costs and maybe like rail to Boston, where maybe it's better to go to Worcester. We need to really take a look at what the facts are and what the need is, and get beyond the politics and really try to find some solutions.
Yeah, good data makes for good policy.
That's right.
Well, I think you have to look at it to see where the problems exist, because if you have somebody here in Nashua just looking at the problems of Nashua and not the problems of Hudson, Londonderry, Merrimack, Milford, work as a group on a problem. I mean, we're all family in a big way, if you want to think it that way, and try to develop so that we all prosper.
So what else is coming up, Carl, that's of interest to our listeners and watchers?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what is coming up. We're waiting to see what all the bills are and everything.
Yeah, but these LSRs that have interesting captions for headlines of their title and what's really in the bill. So
that's something that we're going to look at. We're going to look at that carefully, and you'll see other parts of People's View coming into being. We're going to do a review of the agenda up there in the legislature so that people know what's coming up in the committee meetings, what are the hot spots and things of that nature, and the progress as the bills go through. We'll do a special program on weekends that will talk about the coming week so that people have an idea of what they might want to go up there for, to talk about, and we'll be we'll be interviewing some of the administration, so that we'll find out what the Department of Education's doing, the Department of Health and Human Services, what the governor is doing. We'll get him to talk about his, eventually in February, I guess, when he has to put this budget out. Yeah, and follow some of those important things like the budget. Obviously, it's a big thing, but we'll try to pick out the interesting parts of it and not bore you with a whole bunch of little details, and let you know what we see coming and how you might want to participate if you do. And we're going to ask for a lot of feedback from the audience. The audience should contact us either through the NashuaGOP.org website or to our websites and phone numbers that you might find at the end of this session. We're going to be trying to be providing the another viewpoint, maybe. Maybe, as I said, the Republican viewpoints might be a little bit different than the Democrat. And then you have a couple of other viewpoints that come in. I'm not sure we're going to be able to cover every viewpoint, but we'll try to explain from our point of view what people are doing up there to regulate your life. It's our life too, and we're sensitive to that.
And I think there's an important part that's also useful to mention, Carl, which is the importance of the public hearing.
Definitely. Yeah, you get some points of views that you never anticipated. I know just putting in a parking lot on Lake Sunapee got more people to a meeting at the Public Works Committee, and a lot of back and forth on it, and I don't think that's still satisfied up there.
One of the trademarks of politics in New Hampshire, the retail politics that we enjoy here with the small population and 400 state legislators, third largest legislative body in the world, is that there is good access. And if people have issues, I think they really need to understand it, that their voice will be heard. You can easily go to Concord to testify. I was up testifying in some of the airport aircraft registration fee legislation that was put through in this last term that I think does a great job to enhance New Hampshire's competitiveness compared to surrounding states. And you get a chance to testify and see how that process works. Maybe a lot of folks think it's somehow inaccessible, but it's not. You can drive there. I mean, from Nashua, it's just a bit of a drive, and then you can participate in these meetings. Your voices will be heard. And if there's something that comes up that people are concerned about, whether it's education, like you mentioned, because all these things do affect our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
You can go to an aldermanic meeting in City Hall and you can testify there at the microphone and no one's going to stop you. You read about in the paper once in a while, some town is saying, we're not going to listen to public comment anymore. We're not going to, that's bad. We're not going to, we're going to put a time limit on it. We don't do that in Nashua. And I don't see that Concord does it. Maybe there are some rules that I'm not familiar with. But folks do have a chance to participate, to let their voice be heard.
Every piece of legislation that's submitted there gets a hearing in a committee.
Wow. That's
You can't stop. Sometimes it gets 2 or 3 committees.
How many pieces of legislation typically go through in a year?
Over 1,000.
So over 1,000 pieces of legislation, multiple committees. If someone says there's no time or no opportunity, well, clearly there are opportunities.
Yeah.
There's lots of them. And people are listened to.
And I think we should emphasize how easy it is to go up to testify. I mean, the committees will welcome public testimony.
Absolutely.
You know, the committee is a bipartisan group of people. It's not like Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other. They're all mixed up, you know, so nobody's going to take any partisan shots. And their job is to listen to people who've got concerns. They may ask you a question or two to explain it. You'll get thanked for showing up and testifying.
And for the most part, they're made to feel comfortable up there. You know, people are somewhat nervous about talking in front of an important body, you know.
I mean, you and I were legislators.
That's right.
Regular folks, you know.
Not
We're
regular
your neighbors.
folks.
What do you think?
That's right.
What do you think, Carl?
That's right.
Appreciate your thoughts.
Well,
that's how it goes.
that's why when I got in it, I didn't know what to expect.
No, I didn't know either.
And the first year, you're usually listening to a lot, but some people are much easier, you know, they fit in a little bit quicker and they speak up. But it's an interesting discussion because you can ask questions that lead to more knowledge, if nothing else. You know,
and it keeps your legislators grounded.
Yeah.
You know, if there's something going on that you don't like, they will listen to you.
Yes.
They will.
It's important that we speak up because we shouldn't. This is participative self-government.
Right.
You know, it's very important that folks vote every year, certainly, or every opportunity that they have. But it's also important that they do what they can to speak up because legislators, if we're not careful, that's how government starts to grow. And then these people start to advance their own agendas. Maybe they think in the beginning that this is something that the 3 of us really want. But it may not be what we want.
Right.
And so we have to let them know. And ultimately, it might just be that they're making decisions that are based on what they want. And that's how things start to get out of control. We have some legislators who have been up there for a long, long period of time. And there's some advantage to that. I mean, they understand how the system works and they know the history and maybe they can help push something through that's a good idea. But on the other hand, maybe they're at a point where they're really just advancing their own agendas. And really, it's up to the people at home to make sure that doesn't happen.
Interesting anecdote about Nashua was they seem to want to throw the bums out every few years. I remember in 2010 there was a big throw out the bums from 2008, and then last time it was throw out the bums from 2014 and 16. So. There's not a lot of entrenched people from Nashua in the legislature. We all kind of have to be on our toes and explain why we deserve to be elected to make that $100 a year.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting to be a participant in that. I'm very both proud and I'd like to see more people run for it. There's no reason why anybody who can afford the time, you know, and balance a job. Because a lot of times, I know there's a couple businesses that allowed people here in Nashua to serve up there because they gave them the time off, 1 day a week that they vote, and 1 or 2 days where there's committee meetings. And you can balance it. You don't have to be there 100%, but you should be there at least 90% of the time. So I think that people ought to go up there, if nothing else, to see how everything works.
Right.
Just to visit in once in a while and see how a law goes through the steps and how it's discussed. And you have 400 people voting on it in the House. The Senate's pretty interesting too, but it's there's only 5 people on their committees, but those people who get the same amount of money as the representatives have to serve on maybe 3 different committees because there's only 24 of them. And so it's kind of interesting to hear that. You hear it discussed from maybe a different perspective too. Because a lot of the senators do have a lot of time put in already. They're usually ones who have a source of income that allows them to spend a lot of time up there because they have to spend more than the representatives. But it's something I think all the people should know. And, the kids that come up, even the 4th grade kids, are very appreciative of seeing what happens up there.
The 4th graders.
You ought to see them when they come up. It's very interesting how alert they are and knowledgeable. A 4th grader, when I gave out some of those books that the Secretary of State supplies, were telling me, they were thanking me. I have a whole book now to study.
Well, the system that we have here in New Hampshire is basically the same as the system that exists federally.
Right.
And we don't have a chance to go down to Washington all the time, but we have a legislative body, we have an executive body, we have a judicial branch, and the balance that we have in the state is an excellent model of what happens nationally. So if the kids can come in and can learn how this process works, how it's supposed to work.
A better example of what happens nationally.
Well, okay, yes, probably so. A better example, right. But I think I would share your encouragement to folks to consider running for office themselves.
Yes.
It's accessible in New Hampshire, and it's a great opportunity to serve. As we grow older in life, we go through high school and early career, we're always looking to what those folks out there are deciding for us. But we get to a point in our lives where now it's our turn.
Right.
And I think it's important that we take an opportunity, try, run, serve a term or 2. It's only a 2-year term for state rep.
Well, you try.
They're all 2-year terms.
That's right.
But
we're on a short leash. Coming on down.
That's absolutely right.
But you could start out in something local, a local committee or a local group like the Education Board of Education.
Board of Education.
Yeah, very important, I think.
Public Works.
Public Works. They have that.
Yeah.
We have the aldermen if you want to go to a little bit deeper in it, into it. So there's a whole much opportunities that come up next year. We're going to have those elections.
And there are a lot of offices or positions in the city that are extremely, just volunteer, purely volunteer. Committees that the mayor appoints someone to, the Board of Aldermen confirms them on. It can be a zoning board, it can be planning, it can be the airport authority, it can be almost anything. There's so many positions out there that people are always volunteering for and stepping up and spending some time to help support their community. So these are all great opportunities, and we don't want to see the same people doing it all the time.
I agree.
That's one of the reasons for even ever talking about term limits, is that you want to have some change. So I encourage people to get involved locally, see what it's like, and then try something else if you'd like, whether it's an appointed position or an elected position. There's plenty of jobs that need to be done, and we don't want the same people doing them all the time.
And we'd like people to ask questions too. I hope hopefully we're providing you with enough information. If you see us wandering a different way or not a way that you're interested in, let us know, and maybe we can cover that too. I do have one other thing I wanted to bring up, is that if you want to copy our YouTube, all this is recorded. It's shown on Nashua TV. Channel 96, as you're looking at it now, but it also is on YouTube, and it's also older issues are on the NashuaGOP.org website that you can pick up and play back or forward to some friends, and then you can have discussions in your own little neighborhood. I think
I'll
that's
be posting
something
this to Facebook. I think a lot of people post things to Facebook, and It's a great way to get the word out there.
But one other thing that I did want to do is talk to people about participating, getting some literature, what's happening in the federal and state. These are things that come out. Waste Watch. I don't know how many people know that there's a whole report on government waste. And one of the things they're pointing out is that those, what do you call them, the number of earmarks in federal legislation is increasing again. People are getting in special projects where they don't, where they amount up to a lot when they talk about them. But when you have, what was this here? This one reported that there's 200 and some, and now it's up to $1 trillion.
Earmarks.
Earmarks over a 5-year period. It's $1 trillion. You talk about money for a wall, you just cut a couple of these earmarks out. But there's a report telling you it's done by both parties, so it's not...
Bring home the bacon.
Sure.
Yeah.
Bringing home the bacon.
And it's usually the ones that have been there a long time.
Right.
The longer you are, the more power you have in getting an earmark in. But those things are something you might want us to talk about a little bit more. Let us know. We also have things that are affecting us that is being done by the UN that we might not want. As far as actually against some current legislation that we have federally, they want to change that. It has to do with supporting, and we support it because federally they pay some of those UN fees. Not all of them, because there are some, but a lot of it focuses on things like abortion. But there are other things that, they want us to control guns somehow. They want us to do. And I think we have to let our people know that these are the things out there that you have to be careful about.
You do. I think a nation's sovereignty is important, no matter whose nation it is. I can't tell Ethiopia how to run their country.
Right.
That's their country, this is our country,
Right.
and I don't want someone from the UN, maybe from Ethiopia, telling us how we should run the United States.
Right.
A nation's sovereignty is important. We're learning, we're seeing how globalism is being rejected in Europe. It doesn't work, and we're moving back. The world seems to be moving back, at least Europe does, to a more individual country, sovereign nation basis. And it's important that we understand that there are some efforts to maybe undermine United States sovereignty. We're a big country, the most successful country, and we've become an easy target. A lot of people don't like that, maybe that we have that kind of success. So we need to guard that. We don't want to be asleep. I think most of us really just want to live our lives. And we vote every year or two and thinking those people that we elect are going to take care of it for us. But that's not always the case, and we don't want to vote and then disengage. So I think understanding what the UN and others might be trying to do, it's very important.
And there's a lot of information out there, either on the website or you get it in the mail if you don't do the computer stuff. But there's a lot of good information out there that you want to find out and maybe discuss. And it could possibly learn out how it could affect us. You know? So anyway, again, we'd like to welcome your comments. We're looking forward to it. We'll have this very frequently during the year, and we'll also have something to keep you informed about what's happening week to week up there in Concord. There'll be another special session of the People's View just focused on that. So please tune in and let us know how you feel about this new show. And thank you again for listening in.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.